The newest update for Crusader Kings III brings its third expansion to the table, and it is a big one. Roads to Power is most certainly the chunkiest CK3 DLC so far, primarily focusing on the Byzantine Empire as well as being landless. In this video, I will give you a complete overview of what to expect, discuss the good, the bad and the ugly, and fill you in on what I think about this update in its entirety, DLC and free patch combined. But let's actually start with my judgment right from the start. If you want to play CK3, I don't really want to recommend this DLC to you, but I also think I have to. You will see what I mean when I say that as the video continues. Let's start with a mechanic that lays the groundwork for the main attractions of the DLC and must be understood in its entirety to understand how the Byzantine Empire and the landless adventurers play. Let's talk about the Scheme Rework. Until now, schemes were pretty much running themselves. The better your scheming abilities were, the less did you really need to micromanage anything, as your success chance would typically already be maxed out. If that wasn't the case, you would try whatever you could to get 1 or 2 high-quality agents, mostly your opponent's close family or, for example, their spy master. This has changed dramatically now. A few schemes such as seduction and romancing function pretty much like they already did, but more complex schemes such as murder, kidnapping, many things you can do as a landless character, or the schemes available to characters in the new administrative government are incredibly hands-on. Schemes now effectively require that not only you be skilled, but that you also have a skilled set of agents that can either raise your maximum success chance, shorten the time it takes to build up to that chance, or impact how easily you are discovered. I totally understand what this rework of schemes was meant to achieve. Byzantine and adventurer gameplay both heavily rely on utilizing schemes, and the old scheme system, as hands-off as it was far too simple to consider it a good fit if that is the focus. However, the rework as it is now in the game falls flat on its nose. Where one previously did relatively little, chances are that one now has to tediously add up to 5 characters as agents or let them be autofilled. But be warned, autofill is far from optimal. Making the player select characters individually from a suggested list would be fine if it somehow produced engaging stories. All the Dukes of the Empire planning to kidnap the co-emperor certainly has different storytelling potential than if it were just you and your courtiers. But the impact here is effectively nil. There are only a few new events, and those that are there aren't really building any type of story either. Putting names to the modifiers, making things at least a bit of a back and forth by giving the schemed-on person the option to activate countermeasures, and making schemes more interactive in general are without a doubt sensible approaches. But the actual implementation delivers virtually no narrative potential regardless. Plot agents, despite now having distinct roles that clearly attribute some type of guilt to them in the plot, still are not treated as criminals after the plot is executed, nor do they remember or consider that you already killed 15 other people with their help. Things are more personalized, but that personalization means little to nothing and effectively drags down the entire rework. This update desperately attempts to refine the scheming part of gameplay, but now finds itself with an implementation that primarily pushes the player into busy work with very little added reward. It could have been an outstanding improvement if scheming had, for example, become a game of building a shadowy network on a regional or per title basis. For example, if my ability to know things or murder somebody had depended on a true Littlefinger-like activity that then opens those doors. If I had to secure assets and useful people before going about murdering the Emperor of the Romans. It would have been awesome if the player themselves could have been caught up as a naive cog in the machine of another schemer, or could shield another character from hostile schemes through their shadowy influence. Plots could be connected, meaning a few subplots then give me the option to execute my actual main goal, and so on and so on. This plot rework as it is, however, does none of that. The narrative potential of plots has not increased at all. Busy work has risen massively in comparison to the status quo, and all in all, scheming is significantly worse for it. This directly feeds into the next topic of this review, adventurers. Adventurers are a bold and innovative step for Crusader Kings III. Allowing disgraced losers to roam the earth rather than face the game over screen changes how players perceive themselves and also impacts their willingness to take actions with potentially disastrous outcomes. I don't have to break character to guarantee that I don't lose all my titles if losing all my titles doesn't end in the game simply throwing me out. I could easily accept a higher level of difficulty if I, at worst, just walk around for a few years and at best, find fulfilling and amazing gameplay as a landless character. However, this is also an incredibly risky subject, because landless gameplay by its nature cannot rely on most established mechanics of CK3. This problem already existed in CK2's Rise to Power mod, where while you were landless, you basically didn't really do anything. Think about it. There is no vassal management, no inheritance risk, no feudal hierarchy, no meaningful marriages, no big wars for more land, no scheming to kill your uncle that holds 15 pieces of land, and so many other things. All of these mechanics and more not applying to Landless gameplay means that this mechanics walks on entirely unproven ground. And well, it's really bad at walking. But alright, let's talk about Landless itself. When you are a Landless character, you possess a camp that you can upgrade and in which you and your companions live. You can move around, hang around in different regions, and choose a purpose for your camp that you are largely choosing based on what your character is good at, or in the case of legitimists, whether they have a claim on a kingdom title or above. You will spend the vast majority of your existence grinding. There's really no other way of putting it. The core gameplay loop of adventurer gameplay consists of taking and finishing contracts. There are a few good contracts that function through established mechanics, such as mercenary contracts, in which you simply raise your men-at-arms and then get to fight a war for coin, but the vast majority is either a chain of events that you will know by heart very quickly, or a scheme in which you engage with the aforementioned Scheme Rework. The worst part about being an adventurer is being an adventurer. This new feature, simply by existing, makes landed gameplay better, and when you are nearing the end of being an adventurer, also comes with a set of relatively difficult to achieve but interesting decisions. You can mass convert people, become a fearsome great conqueror, champion your own culture, and if that goes a bit too far, the other alleys towards becoming landed, such as a sponsored invasion, buying a title or buying an estate in an administrative realm, are all straightforward and open to you. What remains, however, is the fact that the actual gameplay as an adventurer is dull and boring, because it relies on a simple mechanic that, as described above, does not achieve much, other than assigning busy work to the player. What's more, the text of quests is incredibly repetitive, and what you are actually doing in said contracts will stop mattering to you extremely quickly, as it has no further narrative impact at all. I know that many people liked legends, tournaments, grand tours, and holding court much less than I liked each of these features, but engaging with those mechanics is effectively optional. Are you tired of reading relatively generic legends texts? Well, you can simply not do legends then, until you're less tired of them. You don't have to attend feasts or tournaments. If you are an adventurer, you don't have that luxury. Those contracts are your gameplay, and you only stop having to do them when you stop being an adventurer. To be blunt, the actual gameplay loop of Landless Adventurers is the worst time I've had with Crusader Kings since I did CK2's SPQR achievement with the Defensive Alliance's game rule activated, leading to constant and tedious mega wars that I had no chance of losing, but that still occupied me for ages and kept me busy nonetheless. Outside of the grind, the camp is a good-looking element, although it ultimately is just a money sink that lets you grind better and promises to eventually let you escape the grind. Your camp followers can technically give you malices and bonuses depending on the mood, but it is a negligible part of the experience. Your role of patrons, so your only major connection towards people outside of your camp, is sadly one-dimensional as well, as you don't exactly build up a reputation among a culture, religion, kingdom or family, or even any given individual, as the only thing that tracks that you may have taken several contracts from the same employer is their opinion of you. It serves more than anything simply as a tool to acquire a secondary reward for any contract you completed. From the side of a landed character, landless characters almost don't exist. Since contracts are only given out by the AI unless you hire a group of mercenaries that are landless adventurers, there's not much interaction at all. Rarely, one of them decides to steal an artifact of mine, but that is about it. If you're feeling particularly funny, you can settle them in your land, but there's not much more to it. Obviously, the landless-landed interaction could and should be much richer, but it isn't. To summarize it, I do think that it is better to have landless gameplay than not to have it, but that is also about where my enthusiasm ends. I greatly enjoy the prospect of simply packing up and going elsewhere, but the actual landless gameplay experience is lackluster and dull from the landless perspective and virtually non-existent from the landed perspective. I'm glad every time I manage to leave the grind behind and simply enjoy regular gameplay again. Now let's put that aside and let's move on to the centerpiece of the expansion that also heavily utilizes schemes: everything Byzantine. Here, we can distinguish between Byzantine flavor and mechanics. The flavor is easily described. It's really good. It dives into the complexities of Byzantine court politics, acknowledges a variety of historical tidbits, such as the defense of Constantinople via Greek fire, allows you to restore the Byzantine Empire properly, comes with great assets for buildings and character clothes, and so on and so on. It's just really good. Mechanically, things are a bit more complex. Byzantine gameplay relies on the same core tenets as landless gameplay, namely that you own a domicile, an estate instead of a camp for a Byzantine character, and that a major vector of gameplay relies on schemes. However, Byzantine gameplay gets to thrive with both of these elements, as it does not have to rely on them and nothing else, but rather uses them as additional gameplay vectors to everything else that you already have at your disposal. The new administrative government relies heavily on the idea that holding any particular theme is more often than not a temporary part of your imperial career, rather than something you stick with until the day you die, which means that your relationship to land isn't entirely severed as it is for Landless gameplay, but rather altered. The worst part of the admin government in a practical sense is just how difficult it is to internalize this altered dynamic, as you might jump into it thinking that your way to glory is the same as in a feudal realm, when there are now much more innovative pathways. I would heavily advise, if you jump into the Byzantine government for your first time, be open to trying a different style of gameplay, where you hop around, where you step back from a theme every now and again and maybe go to a different one, because, well, it will be much more enjoyable. Once you do this, this government manages to offer an experience that is refreshingly different. The estate is always a safe and rather bountiful point of retreat that you can trust will keep you safe until you pick up your next governorship. Administrative government comes with a variety of schemes, and while they suffer from the aforementioned scheme rework all the same, they are largely fine, as you're not forced into them as an unavoidable part of the grind. As I was playing, I quickly took note of a few scheme combinations that did the trick for me, and then added those to my repertoire. The AI in the Empire also schemes aggressively, and you will feel their wrath if you are not cautious and make enough enemies. All in all, the Byzantine Empire plays differently, and largely in a rather good way. I think one thing to lament here is the fact that the Byzantine Empire, despite all of the intrigue and hostility within the empire, is still comparatively strong, which effectively means that the historical weakness rarely arises naturally. This means that the stakes are quite a bit lower than they should be. Vying for power is not nearly as risky if there's no outside force pressuring the entire empire, meaning that you rebelling might ruin it. Two highlights, at least for me personally, are the military as well as the co-emperor mechanics in the administrative government. The military in the Roman Empire works on an entirely different level compared to other areas on the map, as troops belong to a title rather than a person most of the time. This means that you can transfer control of men-at-arms at a cost if another theme needs them, and even call upon them if you are the emperor, suddenly catapulting your military power for outside enemies much higher than a regular realm can do. This has two really interesting effects. If you got the influence and relationships with other themes, you can essentially freshly transfer yourself into a frontier theme as the new strategos, transfer men-at-arms from other areas to you, and then wage a war with troops normally only seen in the army of a long-time landholder, or the emperor. If you are, like me, somebody that regularly laments the fact that they simply always have to end up as the head of a country rather than being a good vassal, the way the military works here gives you many more options of vassal gameplay. It also means that the empire wages war with far more professional troops than other empires. In short, an influential empire will be able to crush any and all realms around them, but an emperor that cannot afford transferring troops over will be much worse off, and because of that can be challenged relatively easily. The other highlight for me are the co-emperor mechanics. If you enjoy being a vassal, becoming a co-emperor allows you far-reaching influence without ever claiming the empire for yourself. You can even go so far as to request the Imperial Expedition Casus Belli. This will let you wage a grand war. Here, when it comes to what happens with a conquered land, you get options to be selfish, aid the empire, or aid the emperor. This effectively showcases the entire dynamic of the admin government. I don't think any other government gives vassals nearly as many options to have fun and never ascend to the top tier title. Now, to round off the discussion of the administrative government, you can also apply it via a series of game rules to other tags, and I truly do appreciate that flexibility. However, I think it would be a mistake to state that this system of governance adequately matches the system of governance other realms such as, for example, the early Carolingians, Egypt, or the Caliphate may have had. The administrative government in CK3 fundamentally is a government emulating Byzantine politics, much like the imperial government in CK2 was just that. It does not ask why things were the way they were, what a state or a polity is, and in what relation they stand to other forms of governance. The transition between feudal and admin is just as clunky as tribal to feudal. For me, this is a significant drawback, as I was hoping Crusader Kings III would, similar to what was done for culture and religion, go deeper into the development of governance as a whole, as, for example, feudalism in 867 was hardly the same as feudalism in 1300. With the introduction of a DLC-locked government that effectively mirrors CK2's imperial government, although it is better by a wide margin, I effectively give up that hope of modular and fluid government mechanics in CK3. To me, this is very saddening, but it is what it is. All in all, the Byzantine content and mechanics stand on solid ground, and while the Scheme Rework does the content no favors, it is a new and fun way of playing the game in practice. Next up, let's talk about the start date option changes. Namely, 1066 has received some notable historical landless adventurers, out of which Heir is easily the best, as he has access to a pretty cool, although hard to keep track of mechanic, covering the harrying of the north after William the Conqueror takes over England. The update features a smattering of other new game rules, all of which enhance gameplay significantly. A part of this new content are Great Conquerors. Just be careful with that game rule though. You can have the entire world organized in just 4 or 5 empires within 100 years if you set it to the most extreme variant. Beyond that, a new start date has been added as well. 1178 is a good choice for a new start date, as various interesting characters are present. The Byzantine Empire is quite thin and under threat, the Fourth Crusade and the Mongols are just around the corner, and of course Jerusalem and Saladin exist. The one big drawback for this start date is doubtlessly balancing. In CK3, economic growth really is just that, growth. The later you start, the more money will everybody be making. As there is no maintenance cost for buildings or a high dev level, 1178 is an extreme Thunderdome, since everybody and their mother has a lot of money. It's a fun start date, but I personally will resort to primarily playing in 867 and 1066, as the economies in those states are less all over the place. In 1178, you will frequently forget spending money for a couple of years and end up with thousands and thousands of coins just lying around. The AI is basically in a similar boat, meaning that everybody at all times can go to war, raise a ton of troops, and so on and so on. I doubt that the state of balancing for this start date and for the late game in general can be meaningfully improved anyway, unless a proper economy and trade are added, that make it so that a high development must also be sustained by investment, trade, infrastructure, and what have you. Anyway, let's move on to the last topics, stuff in the free update. We now have a music player, as well as notification settings, which are both great features. Like I mentioned, Conqueror AI characters are governed by game rules and can add a lot of dynamism to the game. Beyond that, a stripped version of co-emperors also exists in feudalism and the clan government, letting you designate heirs at the cost of needing to share power with them, even before you get the power to designate an heir regularly. This is pretty neat, and next to the full co-emperor version for admin-governed realms, probably my favorite application of diarchy so far. It is historical and just works nicely, so that we can all stop killing our bad heirs. We additionally now have access to vassal directives, which I hope will be expanded upon going forward. They are so neat. I would greatly enjoy it if I could not just tell them what to do internally, but also what to do in general in return for a favor or change to their vassal contract. Lastly in this section, the Choose a Destiny content that lets you pick other family members when you die, as well as letting you highlight a specific one to inherit as, is an incredible addition that, similar to Landless, will change how you play the game. Next, something I'm entirely positive on, the art and music. There's really not much to say here. The soundtrack is great, the added bells and whistles for notifications, menus, and the domicile of adventurers, and of course Landless nobles are absolutely outstanding. I believe it is fair to say that the art department here has done an outstanding job, and that includes the first royal court added since, well, the royal court came out in 2021. The Byzantine throne room is gorgeous and even features stairs. The same can be said for the model of Constantinople itself. In short, art, music, they're incredible. Now, after all this, I hope that you get why my recommendation is what it is. Landless gameplay as well as the administrative government are fully DLC locked. So, even with all my issues and my downright dislike of the Landless gameplay loop, this is CK3's first must-have DLC in old Paradox manner. If you don't have this DLC, you will simply game over if you lose your land, similar to how you would game over in CK2 if you converted to Islam without the Sword of Islam DLC. If you play without the DLC, an entire government type will be absent from your games, and Byzantine behavior will change markedly, as they will simply be feudal. This is the first CK3 update that locks fundamental content like this, an entire government form and Landless gameplay behind the paywall. Where the Iranian intermezzo pushed changes to the clan government to the free patch, where royal courts still delivered artifacts to the game, and with this patch even made looking at courtrooms possible without the DLC, where Legends of the Dead still gave the free update Diseases, this DLC locks quintessential aspects behind the paywall. I've been assured numerous times when discussing this element with developers that this is not a shift in the DLC to free content ratio, but just how the DLC itself panned out. While I do believe them there because they definitely were adamant about putting most important fundamental features into the free update, Landless adventurers and administrative government being locked behind the DLC entirely is very saddening to me. Typically, DLC lock mechanics receive far less attention as only a limited set of players have it, and in my opinion, everything about Landless gameplay needs attention. Who knows when we will get it. In conclusion, the administrative government, for me, fails on a conceptual level, as I was hoping for a broader change to governance itself, instead of a return to inflexible CK2-style government forms. But it feels good in actual play. Landless content, in comparison, is a dull grind, but the narrative potential of being able to lose one's last title and just keep going is too good to not use it still. The Scheme Rework is also not what I was hoping for in that regard. Flavor, art, and music are outstanding. So, I don't want to recommend this content, as the DLC locking, as well as various mechanical elements of the update, don't sit right with me. But I think I have to, because you'll be missing out on such fundamental stuff if you don't own this DLC. It's much worse than for any previous CK3 update. Now, I will leave you right here and hope that, indeed, we aren't permanently shifting towards a much more gated approach to CK3 content, as I loved the old balance of content. I get it, some of you think they aren't getting their money's worth if half the update is in the free patch. And, well, fixing that, making it so that you feel like you're getting your money's worth, is Paradox's problem. But any mechanic that is DLC locked has much less of a future as far as I'm concerned. Think back to the Royal Court. Would be nice if holding court would, for example, become a grand activity, holding a proper diet and so on, as it can be done for tournaments, right? But not everybody owns the Royal Court, so dev time is much harder to justify for it. I'm open to be surprised, but I have my doubts that my concerns about Landless gameplay will see any meaningful changes in the years to come. Really, I'm just hoping that this doesn't become the standard. Now let me know what you think about my opinions here before you play it and then when you played the game. For now, I'll leave you right here. Later, alligator.